it. So what happens if you actually try? What if you actually tried to get your mind right? What if you actually tried to live the high life? What if you happen to die cause life is finite? What if you actually tried to live your best day ever? What if you actually tried to get your mind right? What if you actually tried to live the high life? What if you happen to die cause life is finite? What if you actually tried to live your best day ever? What if you actually grind out when the time's right? What if you actually blinded by your hindsight? What if you actually find out what defines life? What if you actually tried to live your best day ever? I'm getting 1% better every day. I'm getting 1% better every way. I'm waking up every day to a sunny day. No matter what the weather say, life is like a record, so just let it play.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Best Day Ever Media. As always, I'm your host, Matt McKeever. Today is episode 29, if I'm not mistaken, and as always, joined by my host, Adam Martin. Hey, Adam, how are you doing?
Hey, good morning, everybody. Doing very well. It's getting cold here at the Citadel. Was out for a cold walk with me this morning, and I was like, whoa, winter is coming.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know it's a little windy here, but I think our Starlink internet connection is going to hold up. See if Chicken Little in the chat already. So glad to see that we're streaming on YouTube. We've got a full course of news stories to kind of explore and discuss with you guys today. I'm excited to jump into it. So I'm going to pull up my screen share here and let's jump into it. This first story from True North. Coots blockade made up of neighbors supported by residents, says mayor. Day 20 recap of Emergencies Act hearing. It was interesting to see the Coots mayor and just some of his different responses because I don't know. If I'm being honest here, it kind of feels like he's trying to play both sides. And a reminder, guys, this story as well as all the stories we're going to discuss today are in the Telegram chat. So make sure you join the Telegram chat. If you haven't, you can also leave comments on any of the stories that we share there. We really do want to make this a two-way conversation. But when looking at essentially Willett here, or Jim Willett, and his testimony, you know, he both calls the protesters like neighbors and essentially seems to be on friendly terms with them. But then it also turns out in DMs with journalists, he was referring to them as domestic terrorists. So I don't know. Like, I guess you can be friends and neighbors with domestic terrorists, but I usually wouldn't use all those words to describe the same group. Willett told Graveland, you need to find someone in a protected position to call these guys out, call these guys what they are, domestic terrorists. Won't be me. I'm right outside their window. I would be strung up, literally. Willett closed off the message with just a thought. And so I guess one thing I want to explore here is how frustrating it's been that so many people have ascribed violent and criminal motives to these protesters with no actual evidence, right? And so we're literally at the point now where, like, it seems like our entire country has to be a safe space where you can't trigger anyone, or you can't allow anyone to even think that you might be thinking something bad, or else essentially you're culpable. You essentially did the bad thing if they think that you're capable of doing said bad thing. And it frustrates me to no end, right? We saw this with who was it? Lexi Z, right? And her testimony about essentially how in Ottawa, it was pretty much the movie The Purge, right? Except for without the killing, the raping, the violence, or essentially the exact opposite of The Purge, I guess, would really be what you'd describe it. Because I'm pretty sure in The Purge, there was no bouncy castles. But anyways, just wanted to kind of share a couple of highlights here. So here's one other perspective I want to share. Has any and this is in Polyev being asked about his support of the Freedom Convoy. Testimony changed the Emergencies Act should have been invoked. Do you still support the convoy? Reporter asked Polyev. I support those peaceful and law-abiding protesters who demonstrated for their livelihoods and liberties, Polyev said. I think it's possible to support the overall cause of personal free choice of vaccination and the overall cause of truckers being able to earn an income while holding anyone individually responsible for anyone who behaved badly. Now, there's a lot to parse out there, and I don't want to get like too in the details here, but even like the term behave badly, right? What does that actually really mean with our modern political discourse, where the word violence doesn't actually mean what probably most of us thought violence meant until we had a police officer tell us that, well, he was talking more about the feeling of violence rather than the act of violence. Where does Pierre draw the line on behave badly, right? Is it behave badly if what you did could have got you a parking ticket? Is that someone that needs to be condemned at this moment in time? I think that it's really important that we get better answers from Pierre, right? If he wants to be the freedom-oriented candidate here in Canada, I think you need to do better than this. What are your thoughts,
Yeah.
Adam?
Yeah, I think the only thing I can think of for why he might have gone so soft on his language there is maybe he just wanted to avoid saying break the law, because like with emergency act, basically and anything was breaking the law. So I'm not sure if maybe that's where we got lost here with Pierre.
But
But I think that's
wouldn't
me
you
trying
think
to
behave
justify.
breaking the law?
Yeah, but I think it's less for his opposition to grab onto, because then, like, if he says breaking the law, then they just go, yeah, well, we made law, right? And so they were all breaking the law, so then they're all bad, and so now you're wrong. So I don't know. I'm just trying to give some sort of angle here as to how this possibly could have got away from him. But I do agree, like, using very specific language would have helped. Like if he said for anyone that blocked emergency lanes or assaulted individuals or actually caused damage to public spaces or anything like that. Like I imagine that would have been a much better way to say that, much better way to say it other than behave badly, right? Like that's obviously very leaves him a lot of exit.
Well, and especially when he said he supports the law-abiding protesters, right? Which I think again really calls into question whether I think this is all just him trying to protect political ass here.
Yeah.
I don't think at the end of the day, I think he'd probably prefer a freer Canada, but I don't think that he'd be willing to die on that hill or cost himself his career for it. Where I think like Maxime Bernier probably would. And we've probably seen that based upon his past actions. But anyways, if you guys want to see exactly what Pierre said, there's a link to the True article in the Telegram chat, so I encourage you guys jump over there and check it out. Just real quickly, wanted to highlight this from Louder with Crowder. Rumble announces the record-breaking success of Crowder's 2022 midterm election livestream. So I'd kind of mentioned this, I think, previously in our DGen Friends Daily Show. Not sure if we talked about this on a previous episode of BDE, but it was fantastic to see, I think it peaked around 340,000 live concurrents on Rumble during Crowder's stream, which I believe blows out any previous record that Rumble had for live concurrents. As well, there was 3 million total views as of November 9th at 1:30 p.m. So again, that's just absolutely astounding. It gives me a lot of hope that alternative social media platforms are going to continue to gain traction. They're going to continue to gain more of the mind share and more of the attention economy. And I think that that's actually really important. So just wanted to share what I consider a bit of a W here for those of us a little bit more freedom oriented. Now, going in the exact opposite direction, this is from CBC News. Wear masks indoors, Ontario doctor of perfect storm in pediatric system. So you guys have probably seen some of the headlines, maybe heard some of the talking heads talking about how our healthcare system is broken here in Canada. It absolutely is. But I think to frame as purely a COVID related issue is pure bullshit. It was broken before COVID. It was broken during COVID. And spoiler, it's still broken to this day. One thing I wanted to highlight, the pediatric healthcare system is under significant strain, and this is from CBC News, significant strain due to staffing challenges, medication supply chain issues, and early circulation of viruses that typically peak in January, February, and March, Lim said. So it sounds like we're off to a very early flu season, and I know those that are maybe more prone to conspiracies or jumping to conclusions, I think it's natural for us to wonder, is there some sort of immune deficit here, right? Like, it is the fact that people lived in a bubble, is the fact that people are constantly fearful to interact with others, is that actually degrading our immune system? I don't think that there's a smoking gun when it comes to evidence on that. But at the same time, it seems so quickly dismissed by anyone in mainstream media that it naturally just gets my spidey sense tingling, where I'm like, well, I kind of wish you guys would look into this more. I kind of wish you would reference exactly how you come to these conclusions rather than just telling us don't be silly.
Well, I'm pretty sure that is just how science works, though, Matt, right? Like we develop a white blood cell response to shit that we're exposed to. And if we're not exposed to it, we don't develop that response, right? So I'm pretty sure that there's no jury out on the science of whether or not being isolated would depress your immune response. Like I think that's very obvious and evident. So yeah,
Well, there's
fuck these
definitely
guys.
news articles agreeing with you on that, Adam.
Yeah, but they're incorrect scientifically. Like there's no jury out on this at all. Nobody in the science would make that claim. That would be so ridiculous. It's that's basic shit.
Yeah, well, I think you'd be surprised, but by what scientists and doctors will, because usually those are the experts being referenced. But I don't agree with the premise of your train of thought there. Further on from CBC, this is a direct quote from Sinai Health in Toronto. My most important message is, if you have what you believe is a serious or even potentially life-threatening emergency, we're here for you and don't delay, Oven said. So I'm glad if I have a life-threatening emergency, I'm allowed to come into the hospital. I was kind of concerned there. I wasn't sure if it was only for non-life-threatening things that I was supposed to go into the hospital for. We're hearing Ford already say, and a lot of health experts here in Ontario, wear a mask when you can. They're recommending wearing a mask indoors and everything like that. Honestly, I think those of us that have been hopeful that that won't be our new normal here in Canada and Ontario specifically, we probably have to figure out whether we're going to come to terms with that this is truly the new normal here, or how much we're pushed back on this. Because right now, the way the narrative's evolved, it's almost impossible for me to believe we won't see a mask mandate here in Ontario before we get through to the other side of April. Adam, what's kind of your thoughts on the over-under here when it comes to mask mandates in Ontario?
Oh, 100%. It's going to come back. Like, I think that in the article that we're going to cover on our last 24 section of this show, we'll just see a bit of foreshadowing from China. Like, it's coming. I would put it at an almost guarantee.
Mm-hmm.
I also guarantee you I won't be wearing a mask. But that's a whole other discussion.
Yeah, I'm very curious if to what level these mask mandates will be complied with versus the general public, right? I think mask uptake or like, I honestly don't know which way the average person's going to break on this, particularly now, because the way the narrative's evolving, right, is won't somebody think of the children, right? It's constantly about RSV, and now children are getting COVID, it seems like, and particularly, I even saw a headline coming out earlier today about how mothers are being urged that, like, if you're pregnant, you absolutely need to get vaccinated because children can get COVID too. So I don't know if the propaganda still works on the average citizen. I hope that it's wearing off on its magical powers, but don't know.
You would think that, but Matt, like, what's the population of Nestor Falls? I went to the grocery store 2 days ago here, and there was somebody driving alone in their vehicle with a mask on. So I honestly, like, I begin to lose hope when I see shit like that. Like Nestor Falls maybe has 1,000 people. That would be
Not
seriously great. Yeah. Okay. 400 people. And there's somebody driving around by themselves with a mask on. So honestly, I don't know where that chip will, like, I don't know where it lands on the general public.
Yeah. And obviously, like, each little region is going to be unique to itself. I think that based upon my anecdotal experience and what I've heard from some locals is, I think a lot of the First Nation reserves here took COVID even more seriously. And oftentimes we're really trying to crack the whip and fill their citizens with fear. So I think that that's an aspect as well. But it is funny. I can definitely tell the, like, out of towners as well when they, like, roll up in their Tesla wearing masks and they've got, like, the perfect hiking gear on. There's just something kind of humorous about that.
So basically the ignorant and the uneducated. I that's what I'm hearing right now. I'm glad
The ignorance and the rich, I feel like, yeah.
Okay.
And then let's jump over to the Western Standard, because it's been a while since we talked about prosthetic breasts on this show. Ontario School Board says imposed dress code on teachers could open up lawsuit. And I get, in theory, where the school board's coming from here, because, like, probably you can get your ass sued for anything these days, trying to tell anyone to do anything unless it's like put a damn mask on, or, you know, for you to make their medical choices for them. Outside of that, you're not allowed to tell anyone what to do. We live in such a upside down clown universe. But I guess I can't help but think, are these school boards making these decisions, right? Are these officials, are they thinking about the cost to the children, right? Like, are they thinking about, at a minimum, the sort of controversy this is going to attract to your school, like at the absolute minimum. But I think more realistically, like, it's fucked up. It's a distraction I would expect for your average student pupil in high school. And Jonathan Kay goes on to kind of break down exactly what was stated. Update on the biological male at Halton District School Board. Teacher whose work ensemble channels the Japanese porn niche known as bakuni. I definitely, which I guess means exploding milk. HDSB now concludes that imposing a dress code would result in considerable liability, especially in regards to the transgender community. One thing that's interesting here, too, is this direct quote from one of the school officials. Even if a dress code is implemented for non discriminatory reasons, it would likely be found to be discriminatory, while it adversely affects an employee or group of employees on the basis of their code protected grounds. I just, it's so interesting to think that like something that's potentially going to try and help at a minimum not distract children, if not actually help them learn better, is what where our priorities are, right? It seems like it's always the adults that need to be protected from children these days, right? It was the old people that were at most at risk that demanded that we shut down things of that nature over the last year and a half. And I just, I don't know. It's just so bizarre. But if you guys want to sink your teeth into this article, link Graham chat. Let's jump over to the post millennial. Breaking: Biden says Elon Musk worthy of being looked at over national security threat concerns. And so this is in regards to some of Elon Musk's relationships with other countries, officials, and corporations. Um, his quote was, I think that Elon Musk's cooperation and or technical relationships with other countries is worthy of being looked at, he said. Whether or not he is doing inappropriate, I'm not suggesting that. It's worth being looked at. And that's all I'll say. And I don't actually see anything wrong with that. I just feel like we should probably also group in Hunter Biden and Joe Biden's Ukraine relationships and their relationships with China as well, if we're going to look at Elon Musk. Because I feel like being the president and the president's son, probably just as a vulnerable position as being CEO of several multi-billion-dollar companies. But it's rich. That's all I can really say about this. Is just it feels so fucking rich for Joe Biden to say that.
Yeah, I find it quite incredible that the guy who, and again, whether or not this is his intention, the guy that's advocating essentially for free speech and de-escalating conflict globally is getting just like mobilized against, right, by all of corporate America and now the president, like shit like this. And you're just like, what are you guys hiding? Like, how bad is this going to mess with your agenda if he promotes de-escalation of war and free speech? Like, these are supposed to be core tenets of America, right? And you're just like, oh man, like I can't imagine what some of the founders of America would be saying right now, where like they were literally all about not having conflict globally and having free speech and general freedom and pursuit of, you know, happiness, liberty, and all of that. And these guys just mobilize against anybody that's pushing that agenda.
Yeah, it's easy for people that haven't studied history to not remember essentially where the founding fathers stood, right? And the whole thing was not getting involved in foreign entanglements, not getting involved in foreign wars, not getting dragged into Europe's wars. And these days, we don't get dragged into them. We try and help start them.
Yeah, but like that was literally like, but like the founding fathers had outlined that in their original documents, right? Like I can't believe that America's got so far away from that.
Yeah, and I think it was around the turn of the 19th century, right? Where the fuck, it starts with an M. The something doctrine, the Monroe Doctrine, right? I believe is where essentially the U.S. then started to decide that their sphere of influence was North and South America, and they need to at least get involved in that. And we've essentially seen the Monroe Doctrine expand to encapsulate essentially all of the world.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that type of like empire building, right? That imperial craziness is just, I don't think that's what's going to lead to the ultimate success of the United States. I think instead it will be their downfall.
Hmm. Real quickly, just a quick story update here from Blacklock's reporter, because again, I think it's easy as we continue to see more and more of these amnesty articles and like let's just move forward oriented discussions, curfew buster must pay $1,000. So a Quebec judge has upheld a 4-figure fine on a harried office manager charged for breaking a COVID curfew by driving alone in his car at night. Quebec had among the strictest pandemic lockdowns of any province. I don't know why I didn't tell the accountant it could have waited. So essentially, this guy stayed a bit late at work and was driving home after curfew by himself and literally got a $1,000 fine for it. And for them to be upholding it at this moment in time tells me everything I need to know, right? The powers that be, shows the politicians, the health administrators, none of them feel any remorse. None of them are second guessing their decisions. In fact, they're going to continue to double down and hold the line. And it really makes me think that things like the Emergency Act inquiry and commission that we're seeing play out right now, it's more important than we realize, because if they decide that what they did was okay, there will be absolutely more of it to come.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was mentioning to you off camera, but might as well bring it up here. Like, I've got my trial set for January 6th for re-entering Canada without having the ArriveCan app and all that shit. And like, we're talking about $6,250 after tax for that fine if found guilty. And I can just like, I'm starting to see sort of the telegraphing of where the governments are at, and it definitely doesn't look good in terms of like the probable outcome of that case. So it's just interesting, right, to see them continue down this path. And really, to me, that's laying seeds for next year's harvest, right? And next year may just look like this winter.
Yeah, absolutely. And when will the insanity be over? That's my question, guys. But it seems like not for a long time, because here's a WTF story for you from Timcast. We jammed them up.
No
Fetterman
way.
defeats Oz for Pennsylvania Senate seat. So Oz
he
actually
won?
announced. Yeah. So Oz called to concede earlier this morning. But you may be thinking, that's the craziest shit that went on during the U.S. election, right? The midterm elections.
Dude.
But did you know, in the same state, in Pennsylvania, a dead man won, Democrats as well. So literally, someone died. Yes.
Are you kidding?
No, 100% legit.
Holy shit. It's over, Matt. Like,
again, we're more and more close to an inanimate object winning an election here.
Holy fuck.
I wonder when will a rainbow dildo become Prime Minister of Canada or President of the United States?
Man, let's go. I could sit soon, any day now, for Quebec at least.
It's just fucking wild. But let's jump into our first main story of the day. I want to kind of expand a little bit of the stories we cover. So we're going to be talking about China and their COVID responses here. China promises change, but sticks to severe zero COVID plan. And while right now, at least in America, the UK, parts of Europe, it seems like they are starting to drift back to normal. Canada, New Zealand, Australia, we seem to be walking this weird tightrope. I'm not sure what we're really going to do next from a policy perspective. China has been steadfast in holding the line when it comes to a zero COVID policy. And there's a few different ways I want to explore this. But first, let's cover some of the facts. The ruling Communist Party's 7-member standing committee said it will unswervingly adhere to zero COVID, but promised to make it less disruptive. It said 20 changes, including in quarantine, testing, and treatment, were approved, but gave no details. The party promised to release stranded people who have been in quarantine or blocked for weeks from cities where there are cases. Zero COVID has kept China's infection rate relatively low, but weighs on the economy and has disrupted life by shutting schools, factories, and shops, or sealing neighborhoods without warning. The closure of Shanghai and other industrial centers starting in March sent shockwaves through global trade. Then further on, zero COVID requires negative result from a virus test taken as often as once a day to enter office buildings, shopping malls, and other public places. People from cities with a single case in the past week are in Beijing, the capital. So I just want to highlight the crazy level of tyranny that's still going on in China, and none of our political leaders will speak out against this, right? No one will actually dare call out China for the insanity that they're invoking. And I want to highlight this from CNN. China's manufacturing hub, Guangzhou, locks down millions as COVID outbreak widens. And the city of 19 million has become the epicenter of China's latest COVID outbreak, logging more than 1,000 new cases, a relatively high figure by the country's zero COVID standards 5 days straight. So I guess, Adam, any thoughts on this before I want to kind of explore a little conspiracy that's been percolating in the back of my brain?
Yeah, I mean, it just seems to me that the way that they've aligned their manufacturing, their industrial capability, and like their rare earth metals, and how that just lines up with our apparent plan to go completely electric and go green in 2030 or whatever. Like, it just seems like China has fully their claws locked in, and they're an untouchable state at this point, where they can just do anything and everybody's terrified to speak out against it, because they know that they represent such a large market, such a large trade partner, and such a huge supplier for the world. And it just seems like they've played the perfect chess game, allowing them to have almost unlimited power at this point. Like, they're honestly the Empire in fucking Star Wars. Like, it's incredible. They just have their claws in everything. And I think the scary thing is that, like, we have Trudeau saying that, like, he admires their government for its authoritarian power because they can get shit done so fast. And, like, this is a great example of them getting shit done. We've got the entire world refusing, and especially the liberal government here, refusing to call them out for what they've been doing to the Uyghurs. And you're just like, oh, okay, so they can literally do anything and we won't speak out about it. And that to me is frightening. And to me, I just see this as foreshadowing for where our policy is going to go. We're going to probably roll out another COVID zero type strategy here. And I don't know, like, on one hand, I hope that there's our version of a much more peaceful thing that happens, like what happened in Germany, where you just have a figure that comes out and just says, I'm going to solve all this shit and save the country. Now, hopefully that doesn't result in us invading everybody and trying to take over continental Europe. But, like, I hope that if we continue down this insanity path, that eventually it gets so crazy that you have to have a hard swing the other direction. And I was surprised to not see that with the U.S. Election results. But yeah, I mean, China seems like an untouchable class at this point. They could do anything.
Mm-hmm. And so one of the things I wanted to explore here was just to give a bit of context, guys. Remember, over the last couple of years, we started to really see a lot of issues with China, their real estate market, the solvency of some of their banks and things of that nature. We've seen China regularly forcing these zero COVID strategies where they're locking down entire cities, essentially shutting down, their largest ports, really impacting supply chain and dramatically impacting their GDP and their ability to produce goods and services. And I forget whether it was earlier this week or the end of last week, we explored an article from the Mises Institute that was talking about the Soviet Union and essentially how the Soviet Union was able to obfuscate through controlling both supply and demand as well as currency to kind of delay the inevitable collapse of their economy. I kind of wonder, like, could this be what we're actually seeing play out in China, right? Should China's economy have actually collapsed by now? But again, like, I would have no proof for it if it wasn't for, I'm drawing the blank now on what the big bank was, right? But remember, there was literally like, hundreds, thousands of protesters in front of the banks demanding their money, demanding like the title to their properties or whatever the version is in China. And I I really started to think about this as I was putting together just an update on what's going on in China with the zero COVID strategy. And these sort of like forced closures of like massive manufacturing centers could actually buy you time as an economy, right? As a controlled economy. And this sort of stuff essentially like also keeps your citizenry too busy to realize that either rampant inflation is destroying their savings, or that their banking system is insolvent, or that their real estate market is in a massive bubble territory. And honestly, to a lesser extent, could that also be one of the reasons why like countries like Canada embrace it so strongly, or Australia, that also both had really large real estate bubbles, and where other regions of the world were less concerned about? Like, the one thing that blows my mind is, literally today there was an article that came out on India. India just threw out 100 million COVID vaccines because no one's taken them. And here we've got China that's doing a zero COVID strategy. Both these countries have massive population densities. Like, we're talking billions of people between the two of them. And yet it seems like their responses and results, like, I haven't heard about, India being decimated and there being no Indians left, right? I haven't heard about, like, it just seems like India doesn't have the luxury of being able to do COVID zero, so they don't. And it's honestly only the countries that have the luxury of zero COVID policies that seem to be embracing them. And again, a lot of those economies were maybe a little sus going into COVID-19, right? Maybe they were in bubble territory. Maybe lenders and massive banks were insolvent. And all this both serves as a distraction as well as a tamper on demand. If you see demand tampered enough, that will actually slow down like hyperinflation. Adam, any kind of thoughts here?
Yeah, I actually had a similar thought this morning when I was reading through this, that like I would imagine their economy would be suffering badly from just like stopping everything all the time. They're like literally welding citizens into their houses. And so you have to think like, well, what the hell is going on there? And I certainly agree that there's got to be more than what meets the eye. And I think that I think you've got a great thesis here in that some of these restrictions could just be a red herring, right? Just a distraction to both keep their own population at bay and keep them seriously distracted while maintaining like, a heavy degree of control over the population and then smoothing out some of the demand or inflationary things that could have been going on. So I think this is a very complex issue, and I'm not sure if we're ever going to really get the full story, but and then like when we get it, I'm sure it'll be like, well, COVID actually ruined our economy, right? It wasn't actually all the crazy shit we were doing with lending and printing money and QE. It's like, no, COVID did this. It's like, no, our response to COVID, if anything, would be the actual culprit. And then second of all, like what were the underlying issues that got us to this place anyways, where we had no resilience? So yeah, Matt, I think you're bang on here with this being some sort of red herring, either for more control over the people and more overreach and authoritarian, power grab, or as a way to mask some of the underlying issues with the economy.
Yeah, and I originally wasn't going to point this out, but I remember reading it in the article, so I'll share it here with you guys. Forecasters say Chinese economic growth is weakening again after rebounding to 3.9% over a year earlier in 3 months ending in September, up from 2.2% in the first half. Economists expect annual growth to be as low as 3%, less than half of last year's 8.1%. Also, just want to give a shout out to those of you watching us on Rumble. I was asking, is anyone watching live right now? And I see me just saying 1, 2, 3 jumped in Winnipeg. Really appreciate you guys watching us on Rumble as well as YouTube and participating in the chat there. I think that's technically the first live chat we've got on Rumble that wasn't me.
One day we'll have some cool animation to fly across the screen when that happens.
Absolutely. And hopefully it becomes more than normal. But let's jump into a second story. This is kind of a follow-up from yesterday's discussion around the entire FTX, FTT, Amaleda debacle when it comes to the currency market. So Sequoia writes off entire $210 million FTX investment. Here are the other funds that are losing billions in FTX. So just real quickly, literally we're watching billions of dollars be wiped off the face of the earth. And a big part of this is leverage, right? Earlier in the DGen Friends Daily live Twitter space, Adam and I and Dan host, I was kind of discussing a tweet that Michael Burry from The Big Short had put out, essentially saying that if you don't understand the level of leverage in a market, and this time specifically crypto, you don't actually understand anything about that market or about crypto. I think that that's a big aspect of what we're seeing play out here, is that honestly, most of these smart, sophisticated financial institutions and hedge funds, they didn't actually understand the leverage that was going on in these markets either. And I think your average person has no clue what's going on. But there's going to be a lot of consequences to this because, again, in January, the Series C investors in FTX valued the Ponzi scheme at $32 billion, which is just like wild when you think about it, right? That this company that at one point in time was valued at 32 billion is now probably going to be worth zero or net negative once the dust settles. So if you guys want a quick breakdown here of the entities impacted, we've got BlackRock, we've got the Ontario Pension Fund. I think that this technically should read Ontario Teachers Pension Fund because we covered that in yesterday's story. Sequoia, Paradigm, Tiger Global, SoftBank, Circle, Ribbit, Alan Howard, Multicoin, Van Eck, and Temasek. So again, there's going to be a lot of blood in the street. And one thing just to note here is Bankman Fried, the CEO of FTX, has told investors FTX has a shortfall of up to $8 billion. And so I think, I'm not even going to get into it, but I think that that's the point of no return here. I don't think that we're going to see another entity swoop in and decide to inject funds into it. As we talked about yesterday, Binance has walked away from potentially saving FTX. So I think that was probably their last hope. Now, we've seen SBF, the CEO, come out on Twitter. He posted a long Twitter reply just kind of apologizing. The one thing that's really weird here, and I don't know if you looked at this, Adam, is he goes into length about how if FTX survives, they're going to become very transparent. And they're going to be like, leaders in transparency. And there's just something weird and ironic about that. Like, why wouldn't you just start over? If you why do you take something with such a colored past and muddied water? Like, just move on from that and start something new if you're going to do that. And probably don't have Sam Bankman-Fried be the CEO or the leader of that entity either.
Yeah, that was my thoughts exactly on that subject matter. I'm like, man, what are you talking about? Like, this is dead. It's done. It's over. I'm sorry, but curtains closed on this one. So yeah, and I can't see why either anybody else would want to buy it. Like, I don't even know. Like, it just doesn't seem
at most
valuable.
I could see buying their email and customer list.
That's
you wouldn't
literally
want to
the only
actually buy
reason.
the entity.
Right. So yeah, I mean, I think it's a little bit absurd. I didn't really understand this entire thread because a lot of it's being him trying to take ownership of things being crazy, but then I think point number 2 or 3 on there is him just not at all even understanding his own business allegedly, and just not understanding the leverage he had and the amount of debt or liquidity they had. So I don't really understand what's trying to occur here with this thread, but it definitely doesn't look good.
Mm-hmm. And then one other point of perspective here, just to add on, this maybe won't just be isolated to the FTT token. So Solana blockchain hit by FTX tremors as nearly 800 million in sold tokens said to be unstaked. And this represents approximately 15% of the circulating supply of sold tokens. So again, Solana, before all this broke, I think was a top 10 cryptocurrency. They're probably a top 20 cryptocurrency still. So there could definitely be more blood in the streets from this. Obviously, we saw a lot of things pumping today because the CPI numbers came out. They were more favorable than originally expected, but it's thinking you've got, I don't know, stage 5 cancer and finding out it's stage 4 cancer. And you're like, okay, well, it's not really that much better.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of where we're at, right?
Yeah. So there's a lot of cope and hopium still in those markets, but I think as this sinks in and as time goes on, we'll see that we're probably going to be down bad a while in the crypto market, in my opinion, for the foreseeable future. But let's jump over and start talking about universal healthcare and how Canada stacks up against the competition. We're only number 1 in one category, and I would argue it's not the best category to be number 1 in.
It's not the category you want to be number 1 in, that's for sure.
Yeah. And so really appreciate the Fraser Institute and everything they put together, and link in the Telegram chat for those of you that want to see it. But let's jump over to the infographic here because I think it really, it paints a 1,000-word picture. So when it comes to healthcare spending as a share of the economy, Canada's number 1 of 30 countries that were essentially reviewed in this. And, you've got Australia at 7th, Germany at 6th, Switzerland at 4, just for comparison's sake. But when we look at doctors, we're almost in last place per 1,000 people. So we've got 28th place here, but we're number 1 in spending. that immediately tells me that there's probably a lot of bloat, a lot of administrators, a lot of middlemen involved in the Canadian healthcare system.
Yeah. Yeah, it's shocking. And like just looking through the rest of these, like what was the biggest messaging from our government throughout this pandemic? Like, oh God, we have no hospital beds. It's like, well, how do we have no hospital beds when we're literally number one on the list for spending as a percentage of our GDP on healthcare? Like I literally don't get it. That seems like one of the most basic things. Like you don't even need to train a hospital bed. You don't need to recruit them. You don't need to send them to school. You don't need to do anything. Spend money to get more hospital beds. And like it seems like we're literally the best at spending money. So I don't understand where the disconnect is. Like, how did this not translate into at least fucking hospital beds? Like, that's so simple.
Yeah, and again, looking at this wait time, right? There's only 10 countries that are reported here, but again, for us to be in last place, essentially last place or near last place for doctors, and the bottom third for hospital bids here out of the data that's provided, that should be very concerning, right? And we need to understand it's not COVID's fault, it's not RSV, it's not an early flu season that's actually causing the underlying issues in our healthcare system. It's the fucking healthcare system itself that's causing an issue with our healthcare system. It's the administrators. It's the way we're choosing to implement this. I imagine the bureaucracy and red tape is absolutely abhorrent in the Canadian healthcare system.
Yeah, it's disgusting. One of my profs at university, his thing, Dr. Hummel, like his main source of income was essentially doing consulting projects for large companies like Magna Corp and Tim Hortons and shit like that. But he also did a lot of medical and hospital consulting. And like he just said, it was just literally disgusting how brutal our system is. And like if you even just look at this, like we're losing to Germany, who's buying fucking firewood right now to heat their houses. Like I don't get it. Like, how do we become the best at spending and not have basic stuff like doctors and hospital beds? Like, it's just so ridiculous to me. Like, it's not like we lack the educational facilities to educate and get these people. It's not like we don't have the GDP to buy the hospital beds. Like, none of this adds up. It's such an indication that we're so far gone that like somehow these institutions have captured so much money and it just gets lost administratively and nobody cares about the outcome. Like, what are the outcomes? That should be the number one thing a hospital is concerned with. How do we get the best care for our patients? Like, that should literally be the only thing they care about. And it's clearly not the case.
And what I think is perhaps the most frustrating thing about all this is the Fraser Institute regularly puts out this report. And these results aren't significantly different than the prior results. And yet still, I see no one coming out and talking about this, right? And we see constantly wild grandstanding from politicians here in Canada about how they supposedly care about us, the average citizen. And yet when you actually look at it, it's like, no, because you would fix this shit. Like, this is fixable. If other countries, right, if other European countries are able to do more with less, why can't we look and start to mirror or mimic what they're doing, right? We're even seeing it to a lesser extent here right now in Canada with like the children's medication shortage. And finally, our government was like, you know what? For a brief period of time, we'll pause the need for bilingual labels. Well, are you telling me that you're willing to even risk a single life because you demand that everything be bilingual in this country when less than 1/10 of the population has that as their primary language? It's absurd.
Yeah, it completely rings insanity to me, and it's not like the medical world. It's not some goddamn black box. Like, we can send consultants, we can send doctors, we can send people to other countries to observe their systems and operating procedures. Like, it's not this really isn't rocket science, right? It's very simple to get consultants on this shit. None of this is groundbreaking. Like, this is just every country in the world has hospitals. And if we're not ranking among the best, then why aren't we doing something about it? And how long has this been going on? Well, newsflash, my prof was consulting in the medical world fucking 20 years ago. So this has been going on forever. It's just like, how have we not solved these basic problems? If you go through this report, and I encourage everybody to go through it, you'll also read that like we also suck at like having up-to-date medical technology. We suck at basically every other category. So it's like, we're spending literally the most. There's no beds when you get there. It's going to take you forever as you wait for your specialist. And when you do see the specialist, he's not even equipped with the best equipment that's out there or the best technology. And that's literally the findings of this report. And again, we're going to bitch about how, only 90% of people are vaccinated and the pregnant women still need to go jump on that. And we've just thrown out, like India, we also threw out millions of doses of vaccines that were expired as well, and then re-upped and bought more. So I literally think this is like one of the most infuriating things that we've covered so far, because like there are very few reasons why we should put up with the level of taxation that we have in this country, and fucking healthcare would be one of the only subject matters that you would say, yep, fuck, it's fine. We're paying fucking 50%. We're paying some of the highest taxes in the world, but we have great healthcare. And it's like, no, actually, you're pretty shit compared to everybody else that's a modern first world country. And you're like, okay, so what is the purpose then of all this? And it's like, well, we get to pay a lot for our administrators. You're like, okay, thank you. Excellent. I don't know. This gets me so mad, dude. I just get really mad about this type of thing.
Well, and again, reminder, guys, this is the same government that manages this healthcare system that's going to roll out universal dental. Do you think it's going to play out any differently whatsoever? Absolutely.
Yeah,
not, in my opinion.
I literally can't wait. And it's also, well, it's the same system too that just can't get anybody educated. You're like, I don't get it. Where are we at here? You can't build a road. You can't do healthcare. You can't police the fucking crime in the country. It's like, what do you do? What do you actually do that you're the best at? Is there anything that we're world class at from the government's perspective? Like, I literally think it's zero. We're not good at anything.
Well, Adam, you're forgetting our WTF story from yesterday. We're going to be the first country in the world to have our world leader on a drag race show. So there is that, at least.
I'm God damn it. and again, I think we would be criticized online from lots of people saying that we're just sitting here bitching about this without offering solutions, but there are solutions, right? We need less goddamn government. We need more individual freedom. We need less regulation, less price fixing, less quantitative easing, more hard currency. Like, we have the solutions here, guys. We're not just sitting here trying to bitch. It's like, but I'm not going to be the politician. I'm not going to be the guy that rolls up to Ottawa and tries to do this myself. I think this is where we're trying to offer some solutions, is just by making people aware of this. Because I think ultimately the only way these guys get to win is if we all just fold our hands. Like, that's literally the only way. I think there's a great argument here for civil disobedience when it comes to things like this. Like, why do we not have our educators getting paid anything? Why do we have our healthcare system not working? Why is all the infrastructure outdated and shitty? And why are we sending millions, tens of millions of dollars to support international conflicts that are most certainly not in our best interest? I don't understand. And I think that part of why we are doing this show in particular is just so that we can help other people understand that, like, you actually don't need to fold your hand, and it's definitely not the best play. But sorry, yeah, we're going long on this article, but it's an infuriating one.
Absolutely. And so let's jump into the fourth story here. This is from the Mises Institute. The end of world dollar hegemony, turning the USA into Weimar Germany. In a recent essay, I explained, and this is from Patrick Barron, in a recent essay, I explained how over time the U.S. abused its responsibility to control the supply of dollars, the world's premier reserve currency, for settling international trade accounts with nations. The abrogation of its duties is leading to the likely adoption of a new reserve currency, commodity-based and controlled not by one nation, but by members, all watchful that the currency is not inflated. So looking back a little bit on history into the Weimar Republic, a lesson in supply and demand. A successful alternative reserve currency would dilute demand to hold dollars. When demand for dollars drops, its price must drop unless and until its supply drops. A drop in the dollar's price is just another way of stating that its purchasing power falls, i.e. more dollars are required to buy the same goods and services. Through irresponsible use of a checkbook, you have obligated yourself to funding a free-for-all of entitlements such as Social Security, Medicare, and the military-industrial complex being the largest by far. Politically, it may be almost impossible to cut any of these three categories of spending to the extent necessary to arrest the dollar's drop in purchasing power. And this is equally true here in Canada. The U.S. will find itself in the same trap as experienced by Germany's Weimar Republic following World War I. The Reichsbank, Germany's central bank, printed paper marks to placate powerful constituencies within Germany. As the Reichsbank printed more money, the purchasing power of paper marks dropped, and herein lay the trap. Rising prices led powerful constituencies to demand increases in pay and benefits. Industrial labor unions, government civil servants, welfare recipients, old age pensioners whose life savings were being decimated all demanded more money. Strikes and violence became endemic, so the Reichsbank printed more money, which of course simply led to higher prices and another round of payment increases, which led to even higher prices until the paper mark became worth more as wallpaper than money. Now, to think about our modern day, right? We literally saw the White House embarrass themselves and delete a tweet when they were bragging about how under Joe Biden's leadership, Social Security was getting an all-time high adjustment, but that adjustment is simply dictated by CPI and the inflation rate. Right now, we see a huge labor disagreement going on in Ontario. We're seeing with educational support workers and janitors and that their union CUPE demanding to see like a 11% pay raise for 3 consecutive years because of what's going on with inflation. Now, again, how this actually plays out in the real world is eventually there's a feedback loop of consequences where at some point in time, if we start giving everyone 10% pay raises for everything, there's going to be more dollars chasing after the same supply of goods, which is going to cause the price of everything to go up more, which then means those workers have to go back and demand more in order to still be able to afford the same amount of goods. Rinse and repeat until eventually you find yourself in hyperinflation. Now, in the living memory, the government's been able to consistently kick the can down the road, sometimes because of technological innovation, right? Which has allowed us to essentially get more for less or be more efficient with the same resources we have. But there are diminishing returns there, right? And in fact, if you look into any sort of sound money or hard money policies, you'll quickly discover that most people believe that those currencies should actually be deflationary by nature, where what ends up happening is technological advances continue to increase our standard of living, allowing each dollar to actually be able to buy more over time. And that's where you get into the deflationary aspect versus the inflationary aspect that we all currently live under. Continuing on from the article, why did the Weimar Republic government continue to increase payments, and why did the Reichsbank continue to print paper marks? Many sophisticated answers have been advanced, such as the government and the Reichsbank deliberately destroyed the paper mark in a roundabout plot to thwart the financial terms of the Versailles Treaty, in which a defeated Germany was ordered to pay reparations to the Allied powers. But the simplest answer is that both believed that there was no other choice than to increase payments and print money in a crisis. It was felt that powerful constituencies must be placated in the short term. Yeah, Adam, did you want to jump in here?
Yeah, well, I mean, this gave us Hitler, right? This shit has unintended consequences. Like after all this happens, Hitler comes out of nowhere and just goes like, "Well, hey, I can fix all this shit. This is really easy. We just needed to take Poland and the rest of Europe." And the German people were just so broke in that point that they took that, right? They took the con man at his face value, saying that this is going to help all the Germans. This is what we need to do. And this is how we got basically World War II. But, and the Treaty of Versailles was actually pretty brutal, but seriously, like the unintended consequences of this type of thing is kind of crazy. And I just wonder what would happen if the US dollar actually does lose its hegemony. Like if it's not the ruling currency, then like what steps up? It's like, well, probably the British pound. So all of a sudden we're all using, we're using Chinese yen or something. Like, oh God damn it, this probably isn't good. But all this printing and just like having no hard money is also what leads to, outside of just like, but for social reasons, like it's actually what leads to us having global wars all the time too, right? Like you just straight up can't afford to fund long-term military expeditions and conquer the world all the time nonstop when you actually have to like back your currency up with real hard money, right? Like you just run out of gold. So like this is the type of thing that brought us world wars and allowed them to go on for 20, 30, 40 years. And it's so crazy that nobody wants to read their history and understand why this is such a dangerous thing to be playing with.
And I guess one thing to keep in mind here is when we talk about like fiat currencies, right? Fiat means by decree or by order. And I think in my mind, at least these days, I just think of fiat as fake. And the policies that come around a fiat currency end up bleeding into all aspects of life, right? I think it starts to motivate people to have high time preferences, which means they no longer can essentially pass the marshmallow test. They can no longer delay gratification in order to get a greater reward down the road. And so you see that in the food, you see that in the entertainment, you see that in the way people live their lives, this sort of like YOLO sort of mentality. Instead of trying to build generational wealth or focus on building out a family, people would rather get the cheaper, more fake version of that and like treat their dog like a baby. They'd rather treat their like pets like a baby, or they'd rather just stay in infancy indefinitely as an adult rather than actually like growing, maturing, and starting to be able to really delay gratification. And I think that that's something that a lot of the Bitcoin culture and the Bitcoin maximalist culture has really allowed me to start to understand or grok. In regards to what the future reserve currencies will be, I kind of lean towards what this article laid out at the start, is that we'll likely actually see a return to some sort of commodity based basket where no individual political actor or entity is in control. And one of the reasons I personally lean towards that as the most likeliest solution at this moment in time is if we see either a fast deterioration or a complete hard collapse of the US dollar. I think that a lot of investors and average people would then be skeptical about just jumping over to Chinese or Russia or a European Union oriented currency. And instead, I think you would start to see a lot of international trade settling, whether it's based in petroleum, whether it's based in like gold or wheat, but probably in denominated in a harder currency that's at least commodity based.
Yeah, I do think that's a good take, but I just all these weird little social cues from companies and influential people around the world just seem to suggest that China's just got so much control. Like I don't know, I think they'd be a strong contender against oil. But I mean I think that's a great perspective as well.
Well, yeah, I guess I'm operating under the thesis that I think similar to how, a lot of people initially thought Russia would just steamroll Ukraine, that there's actually a lot of rot in these corrupt institutions, not just in our own countries, but in foreign entities as well. And in fact, I think Russia and China has a lot more issues like that. And so I suspect that I know that our government is regularly kicking the can down the road when it comes to consequences and feedback loop. I think the same thing holds true for China. But one last point that I wanted to explore here in this article: the US and UK, a lack of political will and economic understanding. So, one thing is certain, however: what Britain can do, the US can and will do in spades. Hyperinflation is a real possibility. Remember, the Reichsbank and Weimar Republic Germany actually had to print physical money. The US Federal Reserve Bank need only click a few buttons on a computer. As price rises, powerful groups demand more money. Police, firemen, road workers, demand that they not suffer a lowering of their lifestyle. Since government is spending someone else's money, it accedes to these demands. I think that we are likely to repeat a lot of these cycles. And as you said, Adam, it's due to a lack of understanding history appropriately.
Yeah, I mean it's not a great outlook though for I think that's another area where again I'm kind of surprised that people are still gonna like the 2022 midterms here. It's very much a close race, right? And I would have thought that the general sentiment from the people would have been a little bit more informed that like, hey, like if we continue down this path, we have a much higher risk of emulating things like the Weimar Republic, and it's just like, damn, I was hoping for better. But yeah, I mean, it's a little bit scary, but yeah, I guess we can always run away with our Bitcoin, Matt.
I think these state actors are very similar to, say, your average citizen. And so within that population of average citizenry, like there's the person that probably eats out fast food 2 or 3 times a day, or the person that smokes a pack of cigarettes a day. And there comes a moment in time where you need to make a decision, like where you start to understand the feedback loop and you make an extreme hard pivot, or you just accept that what's going to be is going to be and you wait until that hard collapse. I think that our officials, the powers that be, elites, government, politicians, all that, I think that they're more prone for the latter, right? I think they're more prone to keep on keeping on for as long as they can, hoping that the next guy will end up having to pay the price for their decisions and their mistakes, versus actually coming to terms and being like, shit, I'm going to have to completely change my diet. I'm going to have to start working out now. I'm going to have to quit smoking, this, that, and the other. I think that again, just the fiat currencies has created such a YOLO mentality, such a immediate gratification society, such a high time preference. I don't think that barring radical change, we can like slowly ease ourselves out of this. So I think that at this point in time, like my read is it's inevitable. It's just the timing of which. And I think that one realizes, even in Germany, right? Like it should have been clear day one with the Versailles Treaty that there was no way they were ever going to bail themselves out. And yet their economy continued to function for an extended period of time because there's always another shell game to play, right? Or an extension or a delay or some sort of, scandal or scam that those in power act. And again, I think that we're likely to see similar things, probably not identical, but similar, right? That concept that doesn't repeat, it rhymes.
Yeah. I guess I've just never been a huge fan of a slow boil. I'd rather rip the Band-Aid and have it happen. But I agree with you. They've got a lot of tools at their disposal to be able to extend the show. So here we are. We're in the encore.
All right. Well, thanks to everyone that watched this show. If you guys enjoyed it, smash the like button, hit subscribe if you're new to our channel. Reminder, we live stream every single day, noon Eastern Standard Time, both on Rumble as well as YouTube. We also upload on Spotify if you ever miss an episode. Really appreciate the support we've got so far. We're excited to continue to pump out this content for you guys. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. Anything you want to say, Adam, before we wrap up?
Yeah, tomorrow I think I actually want to run a book club show after the last 24. So I want to talk about some of our favorite books and experiences growing up. Like what were we reading? Fiction, nonfiction, some of our favorites, maybe some our best series and stuff like that. So I'd love to do that Friday show. I think it's fun. We need the community to hang out because I do realize that some of these shows get a little black-pilled. We're often talking about kind of the fall of what we would think of as some great countries. So yeah, I'm excited to talk about some of our favorite books. And I think that'll kind of take us everywhere from sort of the more fun books that we've read and into maybe some more academically useful books that we've studied as well. So looking forward to having that meeting. And I also put it out there to anybody that's following me on my social medias. Like if you want to come on and share some of your favorite reading and history with books, then like come on over. Just send us a DM. So yeah, hopefully see you guys there.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Appreciate you hanging out with us. And I hope you have the best day ever.
They say life is what you make it. So what happens if you actually try? What if you actually tried to get your mind right? What if you actually tried to live the high life? What if you happen to die cause life is finite? What if you actually tried to live your best day ever? What if you